Ladies and gentlemen, yet again, namaskar. Actually, hang on. Namaskar. A louder one, please. Namaskar. Thank you for that rather cheerful namaskar and good morning. Welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India at the front lawn. We are delighted to introduce the Democracy Index, presented by India 75. What keeps Indian democracy on the move? This session explores the narratives and counter-narratives of the electoral process and democratic systems with Justice Madan B Lokur, an eminent jurist and retired judge of the Supreme Court of India. Guru Prakash Paswan, the author of Makers of Modern Dalit History and a national spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janta Party, and Navin B Chawla, the former Chief Election Commissioner of India and the author of several books, including Every Vote Counts. In conversation with the academic Vijay Tankha, they discussed the political and electoral process, the paradoxes of democracy and its triumphs and discontents. May we please welcome on stage first, Justice Madan B Lokur, who served as a judge at the Supreme Court of India from 2012 to 2018 and is presently a judge in the Supreme Court of Fiji. He is the only Indian to be appointed a judge of the Supreme Court of another country. May we please welcome on stage Justice Madan B Lokur. Guru Prakash Paswan is the national spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janta Party and an assistant professor at Patna University. He has been instrumental with the Dalit Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry since 2015 and has worked as a national youth coordinator and is presently working as an advisor. His columns keep appearing on Dalit issues in the Indian Express and The Print, among others. He has co-authored the book, Makers of Modern Dalit History, with Sudarshan Rambhadran. Welcome, sir. Navin Chawla, a retired Indian civil servant and writer, served as the 16th Chief Election Commissioner of India and conducted the general elections to national and international acclaim in 2009. Navin is the author of Faith and Compassion, the life and work of Mother Teresa, and a biography of Saint Teresa. Chawla is also the author of a study on the leprosy situation in India in 1987, which was released by Mother Teresa. His latest book, Every Vote Counts, is an insider's fascinating account of the elections of India. We welcome you, sir. Vijay Tankha recently retired as the head of Department of Philosophy from St. Stephen's College, the University of Delhi. His interests include ethics in ancient Greek literature and philosophy. His most recent book, Poetry and the Politics in Ancient Greece, was published in 2019. We welcome you, sir. And now the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to be here at the Jaipur Literary Festival. I should hold it closer. First, a disclaimer. I am an abject worshipper of democracy. Let's be very clear. So anything that I say henceforth should be taken with some grain of salt. Democracy is, for me, a force that one must pay obeisance to. Why? Because it was the democracy that put Socrates to death. And he was pretty close. I'm pretty close to his age. So I'm a little careful about what I say against democracy. So, the Greeks particularly had in their intellectual tradition a complete opposition to democracy. So Western intellectual tradition, beginning with Plato, Aristotle, and others, is anti-democratic. Their entire metaphysics, the epistemology, the ethics, surprisingly, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, is opposed to democracy. And I think many of their criticisms, which we'll see as we go along, are relevant to any democracy, and especially perhaps to Indian democracy as well. At the same time, I celebrate the democratic process which we have just seen in operation, and the results are now, I think, fully out. And it is an amazing, absolutely amazing thing that we still have a democracy in this country. The Greeks had democracy. It lasted only 200 years. Ours is a little younger, but I hope will last at least as long. The electoral process itself, unlike in ancient societies, which were much smaller, much more homogeneous than they are now, the electoral process in this country is, I think, so complex, so varied, that I must ask Mr. Chawla here, who has conducted many elections, whether in fact our election process is really free. Is it a level playing field?
Well, the answer to that is complex. Let me just give you a few statistics. The next general election will have 1 billion voters. It's more than the whole population of North and South America, Europe and Russia put together. We're not talking about small numbers. We're trying to do an impeccable election in every constituency in the country. So the figures you're familiar with, they're absolutely huge. But I would like to, I know that I've heard a lot of criticisms about the election process in recent years, which I, as a former Chief Election Commissioner, have really no right to comment on. But may I just point out, with your permission, that if you look at all the countries that gained independence from colonial rule at about the same time as we did, and you look at their state of democratic welfare and where they are on any kind of index, you will know that in our country, we have for 70 years been able to do every election on time, in time. And what is remarkable for somebody who's seen oppositions behave in Latin America and other countries as an observer, the winner and the loser accept the result with equal calm. They might blame that poor EVM every now and then, but they accept the result. So, so this was the point I was briefly making, that where are we post-colonial, our colonial, I wouldn't say, our sort of colonial predecessor and what they did to our countries, and how far we have been able to achieve a balance in our electoral lives. There are criticisms, we'll come to that.
Well, one thing about democracy is, again, it's a Greek word, demos and kratos, the power of the people. The demos is the people or the citizenry. And in that sense, democracy is really a foreign import. It's not native to this country. We have no tradition, no democratic traditions in our past. And I would like to ask Mr. Paswan whether in fact, I mean, how is it that we have managed so quickly to absorb something that is so alien to our culture? So completely, because the central tenets of democracy, as we'll find and discuss later, are completely at odds with the great Indian tradition. I mean, you know, people talk about the Mahajanapadas, but they were not democracies. At best, they were oligarchies. That is a rule of the few. Whether democracy is rule of the people, demos. And one thing that we do have in common with this idea of democracy and the demos is another word which must be familiar to you, and that is demagogue. The demagogue, which is what we mean by a person who speaks and guides people or makes public speeches. The demagogue literally means one who leads the people. Sometimes the critic said, leads them by the nose. You know, so isn't this the nature of our democratic politics, that our speakers, and they have to be very good speakers, mind you, to win votes, to persuade the electorate? Aren't they sort of one leading the people? And isn't this an alien institution sort of grafted on to post-colonial rule in India?
Thank you so much, sir. It's a matter of complete honor for me to share the panel with Honorable retired Supreme Court Justice Madan Lokur, former Chief Election Commissioner Mr. Chawla, and Professor Tankha. I'm sure it's going to be a great learning experience. And you have made a very interesting point, sir. Once the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, was asked, "What do you think about democracy?" He said, "I think democracy is the second best alternative of governance." Then the journalist asked, "What's the first?" He said, "It's yet to be discovered." So I think that's makes for a very interesting point. But in case of India, and like Chawla sir also said, that for the last 70 years almost, we have successfully conducted our elections. And on every possible democracy index report, even the fairly critical report by the Freedom House, we saw in terms of electoral transparency, India got 12 on 12. So any international agency, they term India as electorally transparent, and that's something which is a given. As a country, we have transferred this idea of EVMs. We have given our EVMs to multiple countries, Namibia, Kenya, and many countries in Latin America and Africa as well. So I think obviously, but more importantly, sir, I believe the constitutional promise of equality, the constitutional promise of equality that was envisioned by the chief architect of our constitution, Dr. Ambedkar, and how in the last 7 decades we have actually enacted that idea of representation and dignity. So the newer discourse, the newer conversations, the newer talking points in democracy is about development, dignity, and delivery. The 3 Ds are very crucial to democracy these days: development, dignity, and delivery. And there cannot be a better day to discuss about it. Only yesterday, when almost the 4 corners of the country, the northeastern corner of the country, Manipur, the largest state, Uttar Pradesh, the coastal state, Goa, and obviously the hilly state, Uttarakhand, they gave a huge mandate. They came out in large numbers. I was just reading a statistic that in Uttarakhand, sir, out of 70 constituencies, in 38 constituencies, women voters outnumbered the male voters. So that is a very interesting sign. And this stands true in case of Uttar Pradesh as well. So the marginalized, the disadvantaged, the backward, they sort of get a choice. They sort of assert themselves. They become aspirationals. And it's only possible in this form of democracy that a former member of the untouchable community is today the President of India. A person from the backward class community is the Prime Minister of India. So in this case, I think it's very true that democracy has empowered, the democracy has given opportunities, and like we saw yesterday, it's going to get more robust with time, sir.
Well, there's certainly no doubt that the extensive practice of electoral politics has yielded, as it were, a democratic result. But it comes at the price, once the democratic procedure is over, the old inequalities remain. I don't think any party, I may be wrong, has really taken up the issue of equality as an electoral plank. In fact, what we find is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the caste divisions have become much more well-defined. And what is surprising is that if in fact the majority of people in this country belong to or don't belong to the upper castes, then why is it that our representatives are largely male and not necessarily all of them from the socially deprived or the marginalized? I mean, this is an odd throw up of the nature of democratic politics, that somehow the elites, the moneyed people, still manage to achieve electoral success. So that in some ways we are not exactly a democracy, but perhaps a plutocracy. Mr. Lokur, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Thank you, Vivek. Yeah, you see, there are issues of equality, no doubt, in the electoral field. Yes, it is a fact that most of the persons who are elected are super rich, and at the end of their term, they become even richer. That's what seems to have happened in the last couple of decades. And the poor or the impoverished don't always, come to the come into the electoral fray and don't get elected. That is a fact. But you see, I think over the years, it has changed in the sense that there are, I believe, more women who are, entering the electoral fray. Number one. Number two, I think more women are getting elected in terms of percentage. Parties may not be giving the same number of tickets to women, but of the women who stand for elections, I think a larger number of them get elected. I would certainly be very happy if, more women are given the chance to stand for elections. But then at the same time, one has to be careful, because I know in the panchayat elections, for example, the male just puts up his wife as a candidate, and he's there in the background running the panchayat. That should not happen. Money does play a lot of power, and that a lot of importance, and that kind of skews the elections. Somehow, I don't know, we'll have to do something to make sure that money power gets reduced. The second aspect is that of education. There has been some discussion in the past about people who are educated not standing for elections, right? I don't think that's also correct. That's also changing in the sense that more and more educated people are getting into elections. So it has taken a long time, from the 1950s till today. It has taken a long time to change, but I think the change is coming. The only area where I think the change will not come is in the money power.
Well, isn't that sort of, as I said, written into the fabric? It's one of the givens of democracy, of the practice of democracy, of the practice of electoral politics, particularly in a country like India, where you have a very, very large voter base, 1 billion people. No representative can actually know every member of his constituency. And no member of a constituency as an individual has access to their representatives. In fact, what you find, which is peculiar to Indian democracy as opposed to, say, the idea of democracy, is that it's not a relationship between a representative and an individual, but between a party and a group. So what you have actually is a group dynamic. You don't have, individuals are not exercising choices as individuals, even if there are a large number of women or large number of people of a certain community or caste. They're approaching it and are targeted by, naturally, it's rational. If you have a large voter base who belong to a certain community, then you will put up a candidate from that community. You're not going to bring in somebody who is, say, an international celebrity, though you might bring a film actor. In fact, that's the choice of electoral representatives itself is significant. And I think this is one of the things that, since you have been part of the electoral processes, aren't we appealing more to group identities, caste divisions? Why is it that the castes, the deprived castes, socially deprived castes, haven't banded together in the way in which one would expect them to do in order to, get their representative elected?
During our travels in Uttar Pradesh, we went to Sant Kabir Nagar. Sant Kabir Nagar is in eastern UP. And there is a constituency in Sant Kabir Nagar. There is an assembly segment which goes by the name of Dhangata. So Dhangata there was a candidate from our party. He used to be a former Safai Karamchari. He comes from Beldar community, erstwhile manual scavenger. No one in his family remotely has ever been part of an organized government structure. So Ganesh Chauhan, formerly manual scavenger, Safai Karamchari with the government of Uttar Pradesh, is contesting the assembly election from Dhangata Assembly in the Sant Kabir Nagar district. And this has happened in the course of the last 7 decades. This cannot happen once. This cannot happen in a week, in 10 years, but it has taken 7 decades. So not necessarily that the backward and the marginalized are not getting together. They are getting together. They are passionately exercising their franchisee. They are negotiating. They have become more aspirational, I would say. As someone from the community, I myself realize, as a member of the Dalit community, I am today the national spokesperson of the world's largest political party. I'm the youngest ever national spokesperson of the world's largest political party coming from this community. So this shows that the leadership across the spectrum, leadership across the parties, I sincerely hope that they have realized that unless until you give representation at crucial decision-making positions, it's no longer about symbolic representation. It's about meaningful representation. I was just looking at the data. This Lok Sabha has 78 women member of parliament. This Council of Ministry has the highest proportion of representation from the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and the OBCs. So that is something which is meaningful. What used to happen 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there is a person from scheduled caste, give him the Ministry of Social Justice, give him the Ministry of Social Welfare. But for the first time, we are witnessing this historical and remarkable transformation that people from the marginalized, people from the disadvantaged communities, people from the Dalit community, they are at the real decision-making positions. This morning, I went through a report where the Honorable Chief Justice of India, he has remarked that we need more women judges. We need more women judges in the higher judiciary. We need more social diversity in the higher judiciary. We need more social diversity at decision-making positions in media, academia, civil society. It's a long process, sir. But I think, I personally am of the opinion, having traveled extensively during the elections, that the assertion has started. The process is gradual, the process is slow, but they are now negotiating for real-time decision-making positions and no longer symbolic and shambolic representation, sir.
Well, it's great to hear that the future at least is bright and that we expect to get more depth to our democratic procedures and to be able to throw up talent from all across the board. I would like to ask you to, however, comment on the role of Dalits in the political process.
I have a very interesting story to tell. In 2006 or 7, I don't remember which, we started using computers for the first time on our electoral rolls. And I wanted to know which parts of which constituencies or which parts of which villages hadn't voted and hadn't voted for many years. Now, you know, the computer was then like a magic machine. So we started throwing up, and here I'm talking first about the UP election. It started throwing up any number of red dots, and there were clusters. So there's this village, and this part of the village is voting, and these red spots are not voting. So we sent out our IAS and IRS and all that observers to say, kya ho raha hai? Why aren't these people voting election after election? And we discovered then, very interesting thing, that we were able in the Election Commission to remedy. Those were Dalit clusters or those were Muslim clusters. And depending on the nature of that constituency, the nature of that part of UP, these people could not walk through an upper caste area. So we called the MLAs and said that we want to shift the booth. We want to make it equidistant. And then all the political parties said, no, our people are here, etc., etc. So we created something called the auxiliary booth. So while that booth, the traditional booth, remained where you're sitting, we created an auxiliary there, which was on the footsteps of communities that had not voted, some since independence. And we created 23,000 new auxiliary booths. And by the time we came into the 2009 election, which I presided over, it was over 1 lakh. So suddenly we empowered a community that had been hidden, forgotten. And if it hadn't been for our computers that threw up, and the observers that we were able to send, and the reports that we were able to get, that we achieved in the Election Commission, so without statutory power, but within our own powers, we were able to achieve what I consider to have been a game changer for that election. But I want to add one thing, if I may, in not rejoinder, co-joinder, attached to you. And that is that I've been part of the election. I've seen it close at hand, since then an observer. And what disturbs me most on the democracy index is money power and muscle power. If you have money power and you have a combination of muscle power, you're almost through this game. And I know that the Supreme Court, which made it obligatory, sir, in 2002 and 2003 in judgments, that anyone's educational, wealth, and criminal antecedents must be published and known to other candidates, reiterated by the Supreme Court in your time, that it has to be published 3 times. But if you were to make an analysis, or we were all to make an analysis of how many candidates in this election, just over yesterday, have criminal antecedents and have now declared their wealth in many crores, then that's a blot on our democracy index.
Well, one can make an observation that there have been candidates who have actually won elections with their election poster showing them in jail. Apart from fighting, which shows how liberal our democracy is, you can actually fight an election while you're in jail. But so far as the matter of criminal charges is concerned, I would like to ask Justice Lokur how easy it is, in fact, to put criminal charges against a person. Matlab, you know, you can go almost to any court in any part of the country, am I right? And accuse somebody of something there, and an FIR can be lodged, and that's a criminal charge, is it not?
Yeah. Yes, you're right on that. You see, one of the things that has been happening in the recent past is that about defamation, right? So I can write something here in Jaipur. Somebody in Hyderabad can read it and say that, you know, I read this article, even though it may have been written in Jaipur, the defamation has happened in Hyderabad. So a case can be filed in Hyderabad. Yeah, that is a problem. And many journalists have faced this problem and are continuing to face that problem. But really, you know, criminal charges, of course, can be leveled. But I think there is a responsibility on the political parties also, you know, to make sure that the kind of people whom they, you know, want to stand for elections are persons with a clean record. You can make out very easily that a charge has been framed against a particular person for political reasons, you know. But something like a murder, for example, right? It's very difficult to say that it's for political reasons that a murder has been committed. In fact, when there was no murder, or in fact, when the accused person was not there. So really the responsibility, I think, for that lies on the political parties. On the aspect of money power that Navin was referring to, you know, one of the big problems that I foresee is this electoral bonds, right? So the money comes in, you don't know who is given that money, you know, It can be found out through the bank and through various methods, but not for people like you and me. We can't find out where the money has gone. Now, the result is that some political parties have got a huge amount of money through electoral bonds. And there are some political parties which are just getting a trickle. So if the electoral bonds get institutionalized in that sense, some of the smaller parties will just get completely wiped out. Right?
Can I correct you on that now?
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the hopeful things, I'm told that the Punjab election result was done because a party that had no, sort of political presence in Punjab came in almost by default. Again, through the use of a simple slogan. And this is again where the nature of the electoral process is such that you don't appeal to the rationality of the voter. You appeal to some sentiment which you can catch. Badlav. So Badlav ke naam se, like Garibi Hatao was a great slogan. It hasn't been hataud yet, but it was a great slogan when it came out. It sort of swept elections. And this is part of the problem of our democratic, this thing. That's why, the Greeks were so opposed to democracy, because demagogues could play with the emotions of the audience, create fissures, create divisions, create dissent, create, conflict, and thereby get votes, create fear and greed. So you bribe the electorate by offering them subsidies. You're not doing structural reforms to improve the economic conditions of the country. You are giving free rice, free bijli pani, free transport for people very good for the poor, but subsidies is not good economics, I think. And I think that's one of the things that perhaps right-wing governments understand better than left-wing governments, that subsidies are not actually very good. Anyway, I'm sorry to say that our discussion on freedom and dissent has to be curtailed. That's the nature of democracy, because the demos here, has now got time to ask questions. So there's no time for freedom or dissent. But I think dissent is a very important part, and I hope somebody has a question about dissent. Yes, sir.
My name is Dr. Kailash Gupta. My question is to Mr.
Yeah, hold the mic closer to you, and
yes, sir.
Please make your question brief so other people have time.
Okay, my question is very small, and it is addressed to the who claims to be spokesperson of the biggest party, and a lot of qualifications you have heard. See, charity begins at home. Okay. And if I do practice at home, then only my children will do something. But there is no democracy in the BJP or Congress or any other political parties. After MLA election, they send observer, etc., and this will be appointed chief minister or whatever. If there is no democracy in the BJP, how can we expect democracy in the India? That's the question.
Okay. I think that's a very important point that you made, and I wanted to bring it up here, that all parties, I think, are guilty, and this is the nature of our democratic politics. All parties are guilty of not having democratic procedures within them, which are transparent. If there are any democratic procedures, we don't know about it. Why? Because the nature of political party in India is an apex. There is a charismatic leader on top. And if you don't have a charismatic leader, as you can see from some parties, the party falls apart. So every party has a charismatic leader. The top job is uncontested, at least while that charisma is there, whether it's Jayalalitha or Mamta or anyone, Mulayam at one point. And everything else has to follow. So you have a hierarchy built in. This is what I meant. We are not a democratic nation by conviction. We don't have a long history of public participation. I think the only part of democratic processes that we share is that we are an unruly lot. So can you answer about inner party democracy? Sorry, that was
you should follow the democracy. Ask the question to him.
Thank you so much, sir. And Honorable Chair, obviously, he can give his observations, sir, like you are entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to your own perspective. Everyone, all of us are entitled to our own perspective. Yesterday, 10th of March, 2022, it is a very important day. What happened yesterday will have implications and will define the course of future of politics in India. whatever happened yesterday, it's of very much significance for all of us here. The usual rhetoric of caste, community has now transcended. It's more about politics of good governance, accountability, and delivery. Whatever happened yesterday, we saw the family-based enterprises, the political parties like Samajwadi Party, Rashtriya Janta Dal, Rashtriya Lok Dal, which are entirely family-based enterprises. They do politics in the name of social justice. Mayawati's party, Bahujan Samaj Party, Kanshi Ramji started it with great rigor, with great passion. But today, the Dalits, they're asking this question from Mayawati ji. Where is the second generation leadership? Where is the internal democracy? Where is the collective decision making in your party? There is a reason that political parties like BJP, it's the world's largest political party in terms of membership. Unless and until there are instances, there are anecdotes, there are mechanism of internal checks and balances, I'm sure, like we have been discussing here, democracy must be celebrated. Democracy must begin at home. Democracy must ensure representation. And this has been the problem for the last 7 decades. But in terms of internal democracy, sir, I cannot speak of any other political party. I can speak on behalf of my political party. You have seen, the people of India have seen from 2014, 2017, 2019, and 2022, the people of India have spoken. They stand for a particular thought. They stand for a particular policy. They stand for a particular idea. It is the politics of ideas which is now going to prevail, and the politics of identity will now subsume. Thank you, sir. I hope that answers your question or curiosity.
Thank you very much. My question is more on institutions which preserve democracy. And I have 2 excellent representatives there of 2 of the pillars, the Election Commission and the court, Supreme Court. I would like to ask these 2 representatives what they think about the current state of these 2 institutions, which, as Mr. Chawla has illustrated, were instrumental in protecting and taking democracy to the people. What is the current state and where are they headed? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. You see, as far as the judiciary is concerned, I think it's got bogged down by a lot of trivialities, right? Every once in a while, we do hear about, some good judgment or some important judgment being delivered. But more often than not, we hear about some trivial matters coming up to the courts. For example, the Delhi High Court recently decided something about feeding stray dogs, whether a person has a right to feed stray dogs. Now, that matter has gone up to the Supreme Court, to say that the decision of the Delhi High Court is incorrect. Now, these are things, which should not take up so much of time of the courts. There are far more important things dealing with, civil rights, dealing with human rights, dealing with elections, for example, which need the attention of the court. There are many cases that have been filed challenging the election of a particular candidate, successful candidate, and they haven't got decided, until the term is over. Why should that happen? So really, I think the Supreme Court and the High Courts have to be far more circumspect in the kind of cases that they take up, and make sure that whatever they do take up comes to an end quickly. Electoral bonds, which I had mentioned, I think they've been pending since 2019. So we are 3 years down the line and there is no decision in sight. So I think the courts have to be far more, circumspect.
Well, can I make a point there about, as we know, justice delayed is justice denied. And the fact that justice, more often than not, in all cases, is invariably delayed, provided you have enough money. And if you don't, then you join the large number of under trials whose cases, I don't know where they don't seem to ever end. They don't even start. Now, let me quickly celebrate the practice of Greek democracy, where a trial had to be decided in a single day. One day, it took 1 day to put Socrates to death. They may have made a mistake, and the big reform that Plato advances is that at least in the case of murder trials, he says there should be 3 days taken. So this is how far we are from some democratic ideals that have flourished in the past. Sorry, I'm taking up question time. The lady in front. Okay.
It's a difficult question, but a very important question. There's a smaller picture, a micro picture, and a macro picture. In the micro picture, yes, like you, I've also from a distance been observing what the practices are and not necessarily agreeing with them all. But at the larger level, where with every election, we are adding 100 million more voters, to be able to conduct that election at all with procedures and protocols in place, and then judging that election by the election petitions that go to him or to the Supreme Court thereafter, you will find that the acceptance of the result, as you will see in these elections too, will also be a testimony that elections, however complex they are more complex in this country than in any other. The more populous country, of course, has no elections at all. And we've seen what other elections are like for life and for so on. I want to take you to one small point, if I may. Take yourselves to 1950 and 51. It's the time of our first election. We have coalesced as a country in 1947. We were almost 600 princely states who had never seen or heard of an election in their lives. There were no elections in princely states. Now everything comes together in 1947, and we have to make an electoral roll for the first time. Those people in 1951 and 52 didn't just get an electoral card. They got freedom. It didn't matter where they came from or their backgrounds, but now they had the right to vote, and they were wooed by political parties. They received an independence then with that card and their name on the roll, which we had not seen in 300 years. That is what the Election Commission has also built upon with difficulty, brick by brick, in these almost 70 years.
I have a very connected question to the previous one. Again,
Hold it closer.
Sorry. So again, addressed to the two heads or judicial as well as the electoral institutions. That is on the electoral bonds. You already addressed it to a certain extent, the question. But I think for democratic setup, the financial aspect has so much importance today. And it's not being addressed, as you yourself have accepted. So whose responsibility is it to correct that implementation aspect of the important decision to have more transparency in financial raising for elections? It's not being seen. Questions are being raised.
Yeah, you see, many of these policies, electoral bonds, for example, is an executive decision, right? And to challenge an executive decision, the matter has to come to court. And the electoral bond scheme has been challenged. It is pending in the court. And therefore, to that extent, the responsibility is that of the court to see whether it is constitutionally valid or whether it is constitutionally not valid. And that's why I'm a little sad that since 2019, it has been pending. It's been almost 3 years that it has been pending. If the court had decided in 2019 or early 2020 that the electoral bonds scheme is perfectly constitutionally valid, there's nothing wrong with it, fine. If it's valid, it's valid. If they had said it's not valid, things would have been different perhaps. But today we are going on the premise that it is constitutionally valid because there is no decision. So really, I think the important thing in some of these cases, election petitions, for example, the responsibility lies with the courts to see that they take a decision in time. So that, something like electoral malpractice, appealing to religion and so on and so forth, and a challenge to the election, well, the court will have to decide whether there was an appeal to religion or there was an appeal to caste or there was an appeal to something else. That's the responsibility of the court so far as elections are concerned.
Before we proceed with the questions, there are lots of buzzing questions out here. What we'll do is there are 2 questions from the audience and 1 from the online people watching. Can we take them 3 together and then we answer them quickly, right? So 1 gentleman here, 1 gentleman there, and 1 from the online.
Good morning. I have a part question and a part observation. One of the principles of democracy is majority. The majority wants that particular victor, party, whatever it is. But in our country, we have first past the post. You may have 35% of the vote, and it happens many times, but you still win that particular election. Is this something that we need to address? Because that doesn't really reflect the will of the majority. We see it every day, and I can hardly remember an instance where over 50% of the people actually voted in a legislator or an MP. Unlike the US and the UK, whom we emulate and we hold up as paragons of democracy as well, from where we learned our democracy, do we not need to come down to a 2 or a best 3-party system, the way they have in the UK and America, to make it truly representative of the majority view and wish?
Sorry, that's the first one. We'll keep it 2, and then the online one. Really short, really short.
So good afternoon. It was a very enlightening session. My question is for Guru Prakash sir, that for all this talk of democracy and good governance, how about not intermingling religion with politics? And what is your take on today's leaders' pathetic lust of recreating a Ram Rajya for that matter? So please, if you could, because we had this idea since the very beginning when we talk of Gandhi. Gandhi's idea was also of intermingling religion with politics for the political purity. But today's idea is as opposed to Gandhi. So what's your take on this? Thank you.
And the last one, we'll take the online so that we can answer.
So we have an online question from one of our viewers. His name is Aman, and he's asking that there's a lot of nepotism and partial democracy indexes going on, which are released by the countries which have a problem calling India as the largest democracy in the world. So why don't India itself release a completely transparent and fair democracy index, which is not critical for anyone and might show the real faces of Western world? Quite a queue of questions together.
Well, I'm not supposed to answer questions. I'm supposed to ask them. So I think the questions should be dealt with by the speakers concerned.
The first question there. On that, I'd like to say that, yes, I agree with you. But in these early years, the first past the post was very important because it gave a voice to those who didn't have a voice. So the result is that even a small slice of a party began to have a part of decision making. The result was that as coalitions came about, people who could never have their shoe in the door in the game of power and decision making would get it. But now I think the time has also come to bring in proportional representation, to have a mix that some countries are having. I think we've gained the best that we could. And there was another mistake, one mistake that our constituent fathers made, was that they took the Westminster model. Now, if you go to England, it's a little country, and it's got about 500, 400 odd plus parliamentarians. An MP like him can go to one end of his constituency and come back into his own bed at night and go to sleep. Not an MP yet, he'll be there. But our constituencies are so big that if you're in Arunachal Pradesh, you're trekking 2 weeks through thick forest before you can reach the corner of some village. So shouldn't we have many more constituencies? Shouldn't that be a constitutional reform that should come one day before the Supreme Court? Because the only good reforms that have come, the major ones, have come from eventually the Supreme Court. So that answers part of your question. The second question you might like to.
The gentleman over there asked a very pertinent question, and certainly as a conscious citizen, we must examine, analyze, and re-examine the ideas that has been enshrined in our constitution. But my individual opinion, I consider that men and women who drafted the Constitution of India, they were people of great vision and foresight. And the first past post system, Honorable former Chief Election Commissioner Saab is there, and he's the right person to comment. But considering the socio-political dynamics of the country, the first past the post system can still be discussed and debated. But like the first Prime Minister of India said, it is the second best alternative. The first is yet to be discovered. From my young friend over there about mixing of religion and politics, I think in a hugely diverse country like India, this has been happening since the time of Mahatma Gandhi. And rightly, it was Mahatma Gandhi who said Ram Rajya. It was the idea of Mahatma Gandhi. He envisioned, he imagined a Ram Rajya for our country. And today, when you say that there is a mixing happening, I would look at it differently. When there is a policy measure, a long-term policy measure like abolition of triple talaq, when there is a long-term policy measure like revocation of Article 370. So I think we need to look at it from that angle as well. When there is a saying of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, if you look at it, not theoretically, but if you actually decode it, only then probably we'll be able to decode the verdict that came out yesterday. And what actually matters. There are arguments in defense of hijab. I mean, have we come to it that there are intellectual defense against or in the favor of hijab? Our ideological discourse must not be so polarized, but the beauty of democracy is such. It is the beauty of democracy and the argumentative Indian which we all are, that is happening because of it. The online question that came from ma'am, certainly we must not be lectured on democracy. The Western Scandinavian country with hardly population as big as Punjab, they are lecturing India on democracy. How pointless, how preposterous is that? We of all the people, like the Honorable Chair also pointed, the idea of Mahajanpadas, the idea of Vaishali, the idea of Nalanda, which is the oldest university in the world, Vikramshila. We cannot be lectured. Obviously, you are entitled to your own perspectives, but you cannot give prescriptions to us. Whether we should have a democracy index or not, I think the Niti Aayog is working on that, we are evolving a mechanism to measure the democracy index, but it is up to the government eventually.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank all of you for thanks for the audience for being so patient and democratic.
This was indeed a heated session, and sorry to the audience members who couldn't ask their questions. We tried our level best, but in this democracy, I'm sure we'll get more chances to keep asking questions and keep raising concerns. Thank you so much, Justice Madan B Lokur, Guru Prakash Paswan, Navin Chawla ji, and Vijay Tankha ji, and India 75 for this rather fantastic and engaging session. We request you to accept a small token of our love and appreciation. Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next session, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the personal and the political, will begin shortly in the next 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Please don't go anywhere.